This psalm was composed by David either during the time Saul was persecuting him or the time of Absalom's rebellion. To us it seems more likely that he composed it during Saul's persecution, since David still felt tenderness and love towards his son even in the anguish caused by him. The misfortunes and miseries of the Holy King were the catalyst that occasioned these beautiful songs to flow from his heart. The Lord was weaving the life of his servant and using him as a harp through which the voices of the afflicted and of sinners would resound throughout the ages. Hence God allowed him to be troubled, and even a sinner for a short time, to bring together in him the cry of the incarnate Word, the cry of the Church, and the cry of sinners. In this way forming from his songs a wondrous prophecy and sublime prayer. In the intense pain that was afflicting him, David believed that God had forgotten him and turned his face away because of the sins he had committed. Feeling abandoned by God is a very common feeling that arises when there is no longer any human hope, and when the horizon seems closed on all sides. Inescapable anguish makes one think of the soul's only refuge, which is God, but in a human way, frantically, with the desire to be immediately rescued. The delay of help causes one to feel abandoned and plunges the soul into despair. Those who are in anguish and no longer confident of the Lord's support become entirely focused on their pain. They are overcome with anxiety and confusion. They view the evils looming over them in an exaggerated manner, nearly losing the strength to pray. Thus it was in this state that David found himself. Nonetheless, in his profound humility, David attributed the cause of God's abandonment to himself, whereby he still had the strength to pray. And through his prayers, he felt hope restored to the point of feeling inspired to lift up hymns of praise and thanksgiving to God. In this short psalm, there is a profound psychological progression. Since he was abandoned by everyone, David sees himself isolated, with even heaven seeming to be closed off to him. His anguish had caused him to turn inward on himself. Anxious thoughts and pain had disheartened him. Nevertheless, the humility of his heart made him see his distress as a just punishment. Thus, rather than seeing himself simply as isolated, he understood that God, by withdrawing his aid, was turning his face away from him as a corrective punishment. Hence, in his prayers, David first asks the Lord to consider him, that is, to have mercy on him. He asks the Lord to remember him and to hear him. He asks the Lord to enlighten his eyes and remove the concerns afflicting his soul. Lastly, he requests that he not succumb to the sleep of death, overpowered and defeated by his enemies. The fear of being defeated and overpowered naturally caused him to painfully consider the joy his enemies would have over his downfall. As often happens, in his imagination he could see their victory as a vivid scene, and he was grieved, for nothing is more painful than to observe the victory of one's enemies and of injustice. Nevertheless, as he loved God and was in his grace, as he was innocent in these difficulties, and possessed a living faith in divine goodness, he thus could see heaven opening anew. His pain was like that of a cloud which obscures the sun, but then is gone, carried away by the wind. A gentle and pleasant air of grace now penetrated his soul, and he felt supported by God again. He no longer saw destruction, but rejoiced in God's mercy and prepared to sing hymns of love and thanksgiving, for he felt confident now that he would be saved. David, abandoned and at the mercy of his enemies, without human escape, but comforted by the hope of salvation, symbolizes humanity crushed by the agonies of sin and the snares of Satan. God never forgets man, nor does he turn his face away. It is man who forgets God and abandons him. Just as we say that it is the sun that forsakes the earth and disappears, even though it is the earth that leaves the light of the sun and is left in darkness. In a similar manner, when David said that God has forgotten him and has turned his face away, he wants to depict the miserable state into which man has fallen. Life has become an endless torment of human worries, a tangle of suffering and trials, a severe slavery under the rule of Satan and the tyranny of the passions. Humanity, in particular the Jewish people, with ardent sighs implored the Lord to enlighten the earth with the splendor of his word, which he had promised in Eden after the fall. Humanity implored the Lord that he not allow it to succumb to spiritual death, and that he not permit Satan to boast of having conquered it. The longing for redemption was the cry of all peoples, as history attests. Nonetheless, the living hope in the mercy of God and the Savior was unique to the Jewish people. While nations vaguely awaited a liberator who would bring back the golden age, the Jewish people, enlightened by their prophets, were resolutely awaiting the Redeemer. Through the prophecies, they knew who he would be. Therefore, while the pagans limited themselves to wishing for better times, the Jews were preparing to sing hymns to the Lord at the outpouring of his gifts on all of degraded humanity. The Catholic Church, in agony, continues on her pilgrimage, awaiting the final liberation that will grant her the eternal glory of paradise. The cries of David, repeated 4 times, symbolize the sufferings that afflict the Church on earth, especially those of the end times, during the terrible persecution of the Antichrist. The Church will be so persecuted that it will seem as if she is forgotten by God. She will be so impoverished that it will seem as if the Lord no longer considers her. She will be anguished by 1,000 troubles regarding her condition in the world. She will be filled with pain, and she will see her terrible enemy prevail against her. Despite all this, the sound of unceasing prayer will endure in the Church. Despite being devastated by a universal apostasy, she will pray to the Lord to enlighten her and not let her fall asleep in death. The hope of the Church, like her faith and morals, will not waver, and she will win the final battle by singing hymns of love to the Lord in the midst of the terrifying cataclysm that will shake the world. The mercy of God is attracted to earth by charity. The joy of the Church abides in the union of all her members in Jesus the Savior. The canticle of her love and gratitude springs from the charity that attracts God's gifts to souls. The Church looks upon her children who are divided from her unity and torn by hatred, understanding that this distance robs souls of the joy of familiarity with God Hence she cries out in distress, "How long?" The enemy that prevails against the church is dissension. It divides her, or rather, distances her children from her. Therefore, this psalm is a cry of anguished prayer that the church offers on behalf of her dissenting children, those children who are deprived of grace, defeated by the enemy, the children who are the playthings of Satan, asleep in the darkness of death. Yet man does not comprehend the preciousness of this supernatural nourishment. All too easily he lets himself be overwhelmed by the worries of worldly life, without realizing that by faithfully following Jesus Christ, the goods of bodily life will be given to him as well. It is blindness, then, to think only of food and drink in life as if there were no other goods to pursue. It is a blindness that causes the heart to become materialistic and a victim of the infernal enemy. In the struggles and battles of earthly life, this psalm reminds us that our supreme good resides in friendship with God. Our trust is in Him. Our security is in His prudential gaze that fills us with riches when our soul does not fall asleep in death. The soul exclaims, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me entirely? How long will you turn your face from me?" With great trust, the soul says to Him, "Do not forget me. Turn your merciful face towards me. Look at me, hear me, for in you I hope. In dying with you, I will rejoice in my salvation and the riches you will give me, and I will sing your praises eternally in glory." The great abandoned one, the one from whom God turned away his face because he was the victim, laden with the sins of the world, is the crucified one. It cannot be said of any creature that God forgets them because he remembers them all, but it can be said of Jesus Christ, who could not have undergone his most bitter sufferings except by hiding his divinity, making himself all but forgotten by the Father. Jesus Christ was tormented by agonizing thoughts, for he saw the entire picture of human ingratitude. He was torn in his heart, and the Immaculate Heart of Mary was pierced by the sharpest sword, grief-stricken by the sufferings of her Son. The enemy had prevailed against Jesus Christ. The satanic glee of the Pharisees, scribes, and priests at the foot of the cross signified this. But Jesus Christ did not fall asleep in death. He was not given over to its power, but rather he conquered death, and the arrogant enemy could not boast of having prevailed over him. At the foot of the cross, Mary also prayed that her Son be glorified. Her maternal heart was greatly afflicted at seeing death dominate the divine body. While she might have yearned to bring back the divine body with her sighs, nonetheless she offered it to God for the salvation of all, praying only that the body might be glorified by rising again. O Mary, if my sins drive the Lord away from me, if they make him turn his face away from me, reconcile me with him, so that the enemy may not boast of having prevailed against me. Look maternally upon me. In your immense compassion, hear me and enlighten me, so that I do not remain in death, so that I may again be animated by grace. I hope, O Mary, in your mercy, for you represent the mercy of God to us. I rejoice in the salvation that comes from you, for you are our life, our hope, and our salvation. Renew this poor heart of mine, so that it may sing to God alone, loving him above all things. Be a mother to me, O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. Arrivederci till next time. Jesus, you take over. Take care of everything. Gesù, pensaci tu.